There was a terrible crime committed in Syria. We know that now. It's very well established. This was a use of chemical weapons by the government of Syria against its own people. That was clearly established. Iraq was a tragedy. The American decision to go into Iraq, which I strongly opposed, was a wrong decision. It was based on wrong information, maybe even fabricated information. It caused terrible suffering by many people afterwards, and it greatly diminished the standing of the U.S. in the world. So I think the U.S. was fundamentally wrong in Iraq. Indeed, the international community, I think, was. Syria is a very different case. Here we have a crime against humanity. The use of chemical weapons, which is prevented by a chemical weapons convention signed by hundreds of countries, over 150 countries around the world. And it's similar in that respect to the situation that the international community faced in Bosnia, where 7,000 Muslim men were murdered, were really killed in the worst genocide in Europe since the Second World War in Srebrenica. The Bosnia crisis was brought to a conclusion through diplomacy, through effective diplomacy, and I think the situation in Iraq could have been brought to a conclusion through diplomacy, but it wasn't. The situation in Syria can be brought to a conclusion through diplomacy, but it needs to be diplomacy backed by a credible threat of force. Otherwise, there's no reason why the Syrian regime would give up its chemical weapons and not use them again against their own citizens. So I'm not advocating the use of force, but I am advocating a strong mobilization so that it's very clear to Assad that he can't get away with this. And that was the same principle that was followed in the Bosnia case, where there was a negotiation at the Dayton Peace Agreement. I was part of the negotiating team. It was very clear to Milosevic and Tudjman and the others who had committed war crimes and genocide in the case of Srebrenica that they had to negotiate an end to this war, because if they didn't, those warring parties were going to be pushed back by the international community. I think the responsibility to protect needs to be pushed forward, and if there's no response in Syria, then it will be pushed backward. Once you've committed a crime, you are subject to international law and prosecution. So it may well be that the International Criminal Court will investigate, and it should investigate, and it should ultimately prosecute anyone who is responsible for the use of chemical weapons in Syria.